Hello, I'm Paul Behrman, and this is Talking About The Who, a new podcast dedicated to that nice rock and roll band from Shepherd's Bush, London. In 1962, a young mod originally from Cork in Ireland was living in Shepherd's Bush, and one night decided to go to a local club called Bosley's to see his first ever live band. That band was the Detours, who changed their name to The Who 2 years later, and that young mod was Jack Lyons, who struck up a lifelong friendship with the band from that point on. He was soon christened Irish Jack by The Who's manager, Kit Lambert, and he became the inspiration behind The Who's 1973 rock opera Quadrophenia, later to be made into a cult classic of a movie. If you've ever watched a TV programme, listened to a radio show, or read a book about The Who, the chances are you've seen, heard or read the thoughts of Irish Jack. Thoughts always delivered in a compelling, engaging, utterly unique way. This particular episode of Talking About The Who is full of those thoughts, and we'll delve into those in due course. But first, I want to take a brief moment to tell you the story of how this particular episode came about. I'd had a few stops and starts since commencing work on this podcast in June 2023. Firstly, my ideas for what the podcast would look like kept changing. And secondly, my mum was involved in a horrific car accident and spent 3 to 4 months in a care home recuperating. But I eventually reached a point in May this year when I was ready to take the plunge and, for the first time, reach out to people connected to The Who to see if they'd be interested in appearing as a guest on my podcast. I really didn't know what to expect from that point on. I certainly didn't expect to receive a reply from someone the very next day. I was in the passenger seat of a car when I pulled my phone out of my pocket to check it, as you do. And that's when I saw it. A reply to my message from Irish Jack. It simply said, "Hi Paul, thank you for your message. Do you have a contact number?" A surge of nerves suddenly shot through my body, and the main thought that started running through my head was, fuck. This was suddenly very real. Irish Jack was actually looking to talk to me on the phone. What have I done? I thought. I don't even like talking on the bloody phone. Fortunately, over the course of the day, those nerves gradually turned into a more positive feeling. I'd finally poked my head above the parapet, and already I'd had a result, even if it was just a simple reply from someone. The only problem was that I was away for the next couple of weeks, and the phone signal was temperamental. I could send and receive messages, but phone calls were difficult. I replied to Jack's message and explained the situation, telling him that I'd be happy to speak to him once I was back home. In the meantime, a back and forth conversation started between the two of us. Jack explained to me that for one reason or another, he didn't do podcasts anymore. However, he wished me well in dealing with my chronic leukemia, and also wished my family the very best too. It was a kind of thoughtful message, and I was genuinely touched by it. I told Jack that even if he wasn't interested in being on my podcast, I was just happy to have got a chance to chat with him, even if it was just through messages online. Jack replied and said that if I was happy to send him my home address, he'd send me some of his writing related to Quadrophenia in the post. I took this to be a nice gesture as compensation for not wanting to appear on my podcast. Basically a nice way of saying, here's some Who goodies, now leave me alone. Regardless, I was thrilled at the prospect of receiving such an exclusive Who-related item in the post, sent to me from none other than Irish Jack. Then, a few days later, Jack sent me another message. He still wanted to speak to me on the phone, and said he'd had an idea for my podcast. Now this I hadn't expected. We agreed a date, and soon I was back home. It was at this point that I started to feel nervous again. Irish Jack had taken up temporary residence in my mind. I'd be sat on the sofa, happily watching TV with my girlfriend, and suddenly I would think, oh shit, I'm talking to Irish Jack on Thursday. Before I knew it, Thursday had come around, and I found myself in my makeshift podcast studio, talking on the phone to the man who'd inspired Quadrophenia. He was curious about what my plans were for the podcast, and how I was going to promote it. He also said something that I still can't quite get over, even now. He said, I swore I'd never do a podcast again, but I'm making an exception for you. Why? I thought. Why make an exception for me? Then he told me his idea. An episode of the podcast featuring some short stories about The Who he'd written that I would record him reading over the phone, combined with some archived clips that he would send me separately. I thought it was a great idea. He called it A Mishmash of Irish Jack. As he was telling me the idea, I was already starting to picture it in my mind. A couple of months later, in mid-August, I did indeed record Jack telling his stories over the phone. I then went away with the clips he'd sent me and put the whole thing together. Now, before you hear A Mishmash of Irish Jack, I do need to point out that some of the audio in this episode sounds quite raw. However, despite that, I personally think the rawness adds real depth to what you're about to listen to. The transcript's available in the show notes for anyone who wants to read along as they listen to the stories. Whether you decide to read along or not, I can tell you now that Jack's stories are simply fantastic and that you're in for a real treat. And so, without any further ado, talking about The Who and Irish Jack, present to you A Mishmash of Irish Jack.
Irish connections, Pete Townshend, you know?
Yeah, I have. Well, one real one is called Irish Jack, who's an old friend of mine who was a mod around in the Shepherd's Bush days when The Who used to play in that area. It was a boy that came over to work over here.
Apparently Irish Jack Lyons, said on one occasion, I believed in them, talking about the early Who. I was willing to ditch Roman Catholicism for a greater religion called The Who.
Well, that's rather tragic, because I think he actually did it. And I don't know, I think, that what's, I suppose, quite nice looking back on The Who's whole career is that I thank God that there's some God in there. That I've always believed in God, and so anybody that has done what Jack did and was to have taken, a rock band as an alternative for religion, at least wasn't dealing with a completely empty vessel. I get very angry when I hear the fundamentalist Americans talking about my work as being satanic or diabolical or devilish in any way, because I've always had the highest motives. And the interesting thing about Jack was that I think when he finally came back to Ireland and settled back into the normal rhythm, leads a very modest life. He took the triumph, if you like, the celebration, the glory of his adolescence, and he's managed to sort of internalise it, but it's good because it's contained in a piece of history. With me, I've had to drag it along with me.
Well, I'm glad to know a Cork man has had such an influence on your career, Pete, indeed.
And he discovered that my granddad was born in Cork too, which is something that my grandfather had never told my mother. I mean, I've got tremendous affection for Ireland. I mean, half my family are, they're not Irish, but they've got Irish grandparents. I've got Irish grandparents on both sides, actually.
From where? You mentioned Cork.
Well, the other one was a gypsy, Tinker. And was basically just on the road with a donkey, as far as the story goes. I don't know, my grandmother's grandmother. My mother's grandmother, yeah. And one person in particular always brings Cork in particular back to my consciousness all the time, which is the famous Irish Jack. He's the man that was the little mod from Goldhawk Road who left Ireland and come over and was a mod over here, and I based Quadrophenia on his life. He was the failed mod. The reason he failed is he couldn't afford to buy all the clothes and the scooters, because he was spending all his money on digs, because he wasn't living with his mum and dad, you see. And because he'd actually elected to come over here all on his own. He was only 16. And he's back in Cork now. He's a bus conductor, I think, or a postman. He was a bus conductor for a bit. Now he's a postman. Got 3 little kids. Oh, and he writes to me at great length regularly. He's an incredibly talented writer.
I am Irish Jack, and I am speaking to Paul Behrman. I'm in Cork, he's in Luton. And I'm speaking to Paul Behrman as a kind of pilot story reading session about the Who for his forthcoming podcast. Now, I'm in my back garden shed in Cork with my little typewriter. So I'm going to read a few memoirs. They're about 2 to 3 minutes long. This one is called The Roots and Boots of Quadrophenia by Irish Jack. And it begins. In 1972, I was working as a bus conductor in Cork, married with our first child. I had returned to Ireland from London in 1968. Met the girl of my wallet and settled down to family life and moderate social behaviour. Although now back in Cork, I had never lost touch with my old friend Pete Townshend. We wrote regularly to each other, swapping respective daily weights and telling each other what better men we had become because of our beautiful wives. Pete was amused to discover that I had become a bus conductor, a bit of a change from my job with the London Electricity Board in Shepherd's Bush, filing documents, having cornflakes for breakfast and LSD for lunch. Now, in one particular letter of mine, where I think I used up 14 or 15 pages of handwritten subconsciousness, I informed Pete that I had recently become the first bus conductor in Cork to wear Dr. Martin boots. Very unlike. I had bought them, size 7, 8 hole, in a little shop called Drummy's on Lavitt Quay. Pete's response to this was that he was elated in the knowledge that one of his oldest friends had embraced 70s youth culture, even if I was 29 at the time and he only 2 years behind. The next letter from him was full of social comment about youth culture. I sent him my old Gold Talk Social Club membership card, where us mods went to see The Who on a Friday night, requesting him to return to me by registered post. When it came back through the genial offices of my local post office, there was a letter from him saying how great it was to hang on to such an important document for so long, and he was now thinking of writing a follow-up to Tommy. God forbid, but I think he referred to it as a mod opera. In the next spasm of letters between us, I started reminding him of some of the things we did when we were mods back in the old Gold Talk Social Club in Shepherd's Bush. And some of these letters from me began to formulate the background to what has become Quadrophenia. But it wasn't as simple as that. Pete had already written a song called Long Live Rock, which later appeared on the Odds and Sods album. And it was this song which was to provide one of the germs for Quadrophenia. The second verse has 6 lines, which typically portray the Who's boisterous performing history and that of a certain individual of Cork origin. They go, people walking sideways pretending that they're leaving, we put on our makeup and walk out all the leaving. Jack is in the alley selling tickets made in Hong Kong. Promoters in the pay box wondering where the band's gone. Back in the pub, the governor stops the clock. Rock is dead, they say. Long live rock. Not long after, in July 1973, I went to London for a holiday with my wife, Maura. Although we stayed at my old house in West London, my wife wanted to go visit her Auntie Emily in Dagenham overnight. Being a Shepherd's Bush boy, this was the other side of the world for me. As soon as we arrived at 3rd Avenue, we discovered that there was to be an unscheduled gap in the evening's conversation, whereupon nobody could speak for half an hour, as dear old Auntie Emily was a Coronation Street fanatic. At some point in this enforced television vigil, I phoned my old friend Pete Townshend and was pleasantly surprised to discover that he, like me, wasn't too pushed about the famous cobbles either. We agreed to meet an hour or so later in the famous Ship Bar in Water Street, which was just a few doors down from the old Marquee Club. We lofted a few beers and passed righteous comment on the fashion sense of our respective bell-bottoms and Edwardian locks. Then he took me down to a little studio on a back street in Soho, and to my great surprise, played me the entire Quadrophenia tape. We went back to the ship for more drink, after which, suitably inebriated, Townshend pushed me into a cab and stuck a £50 note into my hand, which was a small fortune in those days, for the taxi ride back to Dagenham. The lights were out at Auntie Emily's and pitch black inside. I crept around trying to remember the lie of the place, very gently, not wanting to disturb Auntie Emily from one of her wet dreams about the Robert's return. I opened the door to her bedroom and walked straight into a closet. The bump in my head wasn't too bad, and soon I found the right bedroom. I switched on the bedside lamp to find my wife fast asleep. I smiled to myself as I studied the face of the sleeping angel, as men do. I tucked him warm to her back and thought back on the evening. It occurred to me that I had spent the last few hours with my idol, talking about the old days, about mods, pills, scooters, clothes, and the music we had listened to and played. And he had taken me to a little studio to listen to his quite not yet finished album, which he had referred to me in a letter as a mod opera, months before anyone else would hear it. And the strange thing was that Pete Townshend had written this brilliant piece of music at the height of the progressive rock period. Progressive rock, as the music papers called it. Led Zeppelin, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, Deep Purple, the very music that would give rise to heavy metal. And it hit me with the force of a mallet that in the 4 hours we've been talking, there hadn't been a single mod inside all evening. Not one. They just didn't exist in 1973. Rock was populated by denim and long hair. Later that year, in October, when the album was released, Pete Townshend would do interviews telling the press that Quadrophenia was based on me, Irish Jack. I never made a penny out of it. Was I ever supposed to? I never took out a copyright of my name. I never expected people to tell me I should be living in a house with 14 bedrooms and driving around town in a Saab. I worked as a postman. I didn't drive the post office van that killed Jimmy Scooter. Those old Dr. Martins are long gone. Now I ride a red 49cc Vespa Piaggio, and I live in a council house. And there's no pension for Quadrophenia. What a fucking life.
The nickname came from the original manager of The Who was Kit Lambert. And
Yes.
I got tagged with that name during what can best be described as a night of madness in 1964. And I'm stuck with it since, that I'm never going to shake it off.
That's mad. Now, you're one of the original fans of The Who, weren't you?
Yes, but I wouldn't exactly describe myself as a fan of The Who, because I regard fans of The Who as people who queue up for tickets and buy CDs and, you know, queue at 5 o'clock and 6 o'clock in the morning for a Who ticket. And I've never had it to do anything like that. So I'm not strictly a fan of The Who. I'm part of what you might describe as the Who family. Part of the Who family.
Tell us about when you first saw The Who, or saw them in action, or met, because you know you're a buddy of Pete Townshend.
Yes.
Tell us about that time.
Well, I first met them when I was 19, and the band was 17, and that was in 1962 in Shepherd's Bush. I went along to a dance, and they were playing. There was 32 people at the dance, 37 if you counted the band, and they were called the Detours, and they did everything by the Shadows. Roger Daltrey played lead guitar and trombone. John Entwistle played bass guitar and trumpet. Pete Townshend was, well, he learning guitar, but becoming quite adept at it. And we had a singer called Colin Dawson, who styled himself on Cliff Richards. And our original drummer was a fella called Dougie Sandham. And they were all working, all except Pete Townshend, who just started at Ealing Art College.
Some years ago, I did an radio interview for BBC Scotland. And the follow-up to it was that people had sent me questions. After the interview, people sent me questions online, and I was expected to answer these. So one of the questions was from a guy in Glasgow, who his question was, did you ever experience a night out with Keith Moon and Oliver Reed? So here was my answer. And I said, well, not particularly a night out, but certainly a night in their company, yes. I was in Portsmouth in May 1974 to see the Who play at the Guildhall and take in some of the filming of Tommy. What I should explain is that a few weeks earlier, I'd seen a photograph of Pete Townshend in one of the music papers, looking very dapper and flash in a white trench coat. So Jack had to have one, of course. I think I picked mine up from Oxfam for about a fiver. So Portsmouth, and off I went to the hotel where the band was staying, and I had dinner with our lighting man Wiggy and Roger and Chris Stamp. I went by car to the gig with Chris Stamp, who joked that we might not get in without a tie. After the show, having met Anne Margaret and Ollie Reed, we all went back to the hotel where there was a bit of a drink-up. There was about 8 or 9 of us sitting around the low table. Pete Townshend was wearing his white trench coat. I was wearing my Oxfam white trench coat, and everything was fine and dandy, only it wasn't. Unfortunately, in an expression of what can only be described as complete overkill, Oliver Reed had invested in his own white trench coat, and there he sat wearing it. The scene looked like something out of Monty Python. The 3 white trench coats looked overbearingly glaring. As the evening wore on, Oliver Reed ran out of conversation with the person next to him, who happened to be Keith Moon, and he turned his attention towards me. He picked up on my Irish accent and made a couple of jokes about the likelihood of me carrying a bomb. He made a classic mistake of assuming that I was this Who fan who had breached hotel security and managed to blag my way into the residence bar. He continued with this kind of piss take of me, which I found humiliating and making me feel very small indeed. Most of the people sitting around the table found it very funny, especially Keith. I listened to it for a while, and then I got mad inside, but said nothing. After a while, Oliver Reed stood up and excused himself, saying he was going for a leak. Keith Moon asked him if he was Welsh. I got up and followed him to the toilet. I came in behind and stood at the urinal right next to his. A bit unusual, as there were other urinals available. We were the only 2 in the toilet. Reed noticed this and looked at me a bit strange. He was about to say something when I stopped him in his tracks and said, "There's at least one person out there who doesn't think your piss take of me is very funny." He looked at me. "Oh, and who's that?" "He's the other guy in the trench coat," I replied. "His name's Pete Townshend. I've known him since he was 17. How long the fuck have you known him, Oliver?" He was speechless. I think he treated me, a bus conductor. He really thought I was someone who sneaked into a private bar, and now he was caught for a reply. I walked out of the toilet and rejoined the company. Later, he tried a half-apologetic conversation with me, but I had blown a hole in his pomposity, and he knew it. He gave me a knowing smile that, to his credit, was well acted, and said, "Truth?" Later on in the small hours of the morning, 3 men staggered off to their respective beds in 3 white trench coats. I slept in mine. Don't know about the other
2. Cork Moments. Jack Lyons, longtime friend and fan of The Who.
I wanted to go to a dance where there was a band. I'd been to a few hops up in Father O'Leary Hall, you know, in the late 50s when I was about, say, 15. I'd never actually seen a band on stage, apart from seeing my father perform as a child, you know, in Kilcully, playing violin and saxophone and stuff like that. But it was in Shepherd's Bush, this place called Bosley's, and I went there, and I don't know who looked more dreadful, me or the band, and, you know, 30 people playing to 30 people. You're a big dance hall, you know. They weren't the Who then at all, of course, they were the Detours. So I just went over and at the end of the evening, and I zeroed in on this guy, 6 foot tall, long nose, straight hair. I never had straight hair, always curly hair. He had everything I want. And what was the bonus was the guitar around the shoulders, you know. I said, hello, I said, I'm Jack from Shepherd's Bush. And, of course, in that sort of Cockney way that they addressed me, he says, hello, Jack from Shepherd's Bush, I'm Pete from Ealing. And that was it. He was Pete Townshend from Ealing Common. And within a month, then I was calling out to his house, annoying him with guitar strings, which were always the wrong kind, you know.
A very talented man by Irish Jack. In my book, The Who Concert File, and hi to my co-author, Joe McMichael, there's a listing with a photo of an ad for the Who's first ever appearance at the Arcadia Ballroom in Cork on Sunday, May 8, 1966. The staggering statistic is that the gig took place 48 years ago, and the Who never returned to Cork until 31 years later, in 2007. But back then, in those glorious days of 1966, with their single Substitute storming into the top 10, the band would only perform for no more than 40 minutes when they played anywhere in the British Isles. That was the norm for nearly all the bands back then, who would tour on the strength of a hit, although by then the Who had 3 hits. So on Thursday, May 5th, 1966, the Who finished the gig at Kidderminster Town Hall in England. The next night, they were in the north of Ireland for their first ever time at the Top Hat in Lisbon. Then on to the National Stadium in Dublin, where 5 or 6 bands supported them. And after Dublin, it was back on the tour bus for the drive to Cork's Arcadia Ballroom, my hometown. The trouble was I wasn't home. Shepherd's Bush was my home by then, as I had worked in various offices in West London from the age of 16 and a half, filing A to Z legal papers and, of course, dressed up as a mod. The personalised entry on page 53 of the Who concert file for Sunday, May 8, 1966, has always made me smile. It reads, before the show, Irish Jack's mother, Anna, and his cousin Joey went to the local Intercontinental Hotel and met Pete Townshend and Kit Lambert. And then in a kind of added poignancy to the occasion, it continues, Irish Jack did not travel to Cork for this show. Almost as if I needed to point out to curious readers of the concert file book that no, against all expectations, I did not travel back to my hometown of Cork with the band. But looking back, as people my age tend to do, it never once entered my head to approach our managers, Kit Lambert or Chris Lamb, and say, look, it's over here since I've seen my mum, any chance to a ride over to Cork? And that's all I would have taken. But it didn't seem important to me at the time. And anyway, I probably had a date with some girl to take her to the Regal Cinema in Hammersmith on Sunday night. It was only years later when a friend observed that I had never seen the band play in my hometown of Cork. This was prior to 2007, of course. That I got thinking about it. We all do it. As we age through the process, we cling to memory like a man clings to a floating log. For some reason, now it seems to me I lost the chance to come back to Cork in my mad threads like a returning Caesar with my buddies, the Who. So, it's the afternoon of Sunday, the 8th of May, 1966, and I'm in my West London flat in Ravenscourt Park Mansions, and in God's truth, I cannot remember whether I actually had a date with a girl or not. Meanwhile, in Cork, that very afternoon, things are astir. My mother Anna and my cousin Joy Wagner already know that the Who are going to be playing at the local dance hall, the Arcadia. A plan is hatched between them, and together they drive to the Intercontinental Hotel. Pete Townshend is summoned from relaxing in his room because Irish Jack's mother Anna is down in the lobby. Somehow the band's manager Kit Lambert, the man who christened me Irish Jack, is accompanying him. They have dinner, and Pete tells my mum what a very talented man I am. He just never stops writing, Pete says. Kit agrees because it would be impolite to say Actually, I've only ever seen one sample of Jack's writing. As Pete continues to eulogise Irish Jack and is careful not to mention such dens of iniquity as UFOs on Tottenham Court Road, where nearly everyone smokes a reefer or takes a tab of acid, Kit is continuing to reassure my mother in his flamboyant Oxford accent and his hands weaving in and out like the camp man that he was. Yes, Anna, Jack's doing awfully well, isn't he, Pete? Mother's instinct about her elder son is quietly telling her that she has been over-reassured. Even the well-meant ego massage that Jack's a very talented man and never stops writing seems over the top. Oh, God, if Kit had only kept his mouth shut. It's time to go and let pop stars return to their hotel rooms and managers to walk guests to the lobby with good vibes of Oxford camp. At that time, my guess is that my mother would have been aged about 50. Still young, but it would have been unheard of back then for my mum to go along to the Arcadia ballroom and see what all the fuss was about. It just wasn't done in those days. About a week later, my landlady, who I shared a flat with, Mrs. Boyle, has gone to her sister for the weekend in Good Street near Tottenham Court Road, and I am left to my own devices. Who shall I ring? The phone is next to me in the sitting room, and I'm wondering which exotic girl I'll invite over. Suddenly I jumped when the landline came to life, jarring me. It's my mother. Hello, Jackie. Is that you, Jackie? Well, it's not Mrs. Boyle, so who in God's name did my mother expect to be at the other end? I always tended to sound less London and unconvincing when my mother rang. Her rich Cork voice would drag me back in and I would be back at the dinner table in Cork. I found it difficult to get in a word as she raved on the phone about the nice man and thorough gentleman Pete Townshend was. I wanted to say, he's more than my friend, Mum. He's my second idol. She said Pete didn't know how to make her and my cousin Joey more welcome. He was kind and generous. He told her he didn't think the band would last for much longer, despite Substitute running up the charts that week. He said that I was a very talented man and that I never stopped writing. As I listened with an appropriate ego massage smile on my face, eventually Mother ran out of superlatives about the man known as Pete Townshend. Then there was an awkward silence. I knew what was coming, but hadn't a clue what she was going to say. Then my mother said, rather uncomfortably, there was another man there with Pete. Well, obviously this was either John, Roger or Keith. Was it another one of the band, Mum? I asked. No, she replied. He was much older, very posh with an unusual name. I'm thinking down the phone. Very posh, older, with an unusual name, and not a member of the band. And yet he is with the band. Now, who could that be? Was he Kit, Mum? Yes, I think that was his name. Is he what, Mum? Church of England? Conservative voter? Of course, none of these possibilities were raised. My mother's background was well-educated, middle-class Protestant. She lived to the ripe old age of 84, and besides being a broad-minded person, smoked like a trooper. But back then, in those happy but dark old days of 1966, my mother found it more difficult to ask her eldest son if his friend Kit Lambert was homosexual. Nobody mentioned the word queer. It was offensive and impolite. The word gay wasn't even in the lexicon. There were other words as well to describe a homosexual person, but usually they were derisive and meant to insult and humiliate. The pause on the phone that Sunday afternoon was like an eternity between mother and son, as my mother struggled to fill the gap. Suddenly, from out of nowhere, she half shouted, "Did you get that pullover I sent you?" My mother, in her loving way, had spent a month knitting me a Fair Isle-type pullover with a crew neck, something one of the Clancy brothers would have worn at Carnegie Hall. Not in my wildest dreams would I have worn it under my sharply tailored 7-inch bent jacket. Oh yes, I got it. Thanks, Mum. It's fantastic. Everyone wants to know where I got it. I lied. Her voice slipped into a hint of displeasure. Jackie, she said. I spent a lot of time knitting that pullover, so I won't leave it behind you when you go out. The hint of anger in her voice told me, and it has always stayed with me, that her concerns about the knitted pullover was the placebo for her real concerns about the company I was keeping in big bad London. She just couldn't say homosexual on the phone. Many years later, when I returned to live with my wife and kids in Cork, I returned home from a Who project in London. I was sitting by the fire telling my mother how it all went, and from out of nowhere, I began to tell her how I had visited Brompton Cemetery near Chelsea and spent a couple of hours cleaning up the Lambert's grave. It had become a mess covered by weeds. My mother looked across at me with those clear eyes of hers and asked, "Was that the man I met with Pete at the hotel?" "Yes, Mum," I replied. "That was Kit Lambert. You remember, he was gay." "Oh, I knew that all along," she said. I never mentioned the pullover.
In the spotlight tonight is Chris Atkins from Solihull, an IT consultant, and his subject is the spy Noor Inayat Khan. Paul Sinha from London, a GP and stand-up comedian, and his subject, the explorer Ferdinand Magellan. Christine Adam from Glasgow, a solicitor, her subject Edith Wharton, and James Corcoran from Didcot, a mortgage consultant, his subject, the mod movement in Britain. Our final contender, please. And your name?
James Corcoran.
Your occupation?
Mortgage consultant.
And your chosen subject?
The mod movement in Britain.
The mods in 2 minutes, starting now. Which of the two makes of motor scooter favoured by the mods has a name meaning wasp in Italian?
Vespa.
Correct. Which Friday night television pop music show whose slogan was "The Weekend Starts Here" was a showcase for the latest music and fashion?
Ready, steady, go.
Yes, at Easter 1964, which East Coast resort became the scene of the first confrontation between the police and mods and rockers,
Clacton.
when 97 arrests were made?
Clacton.
Yes, I'm the Face was on the A-side of the only single released by The Who in their incarnation as The High Numbers. What was on the B-side?
Zoot Suit.
Yes, in March 64, which celebrated mod band played on the last night of the Marquee Club's old Oxford Street premises and the opening night of its new Wardour Street premises?
The Who?
The Yardbirds. Which character in Quadrophenia is said to have been based on Irish Jack, a mod and friend of Pete Townshend?
Jimmy.
So, now I'm going to round it off now with a poem which I've written about Keith Moon, and it's called Restless Spirit. Oldfield Hotel. Does your tattered book of 64 record a crazy cat in a dyed ginger suit? Brandy-eyed, he went on stage and split the drummer's bass pedal. He was the Who, we heard, from that moment on. Oldfield Hotel, did he check out, or was he carried out? He being the actor, the bellboy, the wild man of rock. Flash demonic drumsticks in the air, a cheeky lad from Wembley known. Set us the light you did with 1,000 volleys. Them sticks are twirling like airfan blades between your bloody fingers. The airport risk, culprit the frisk, forever the joker moon, gave us the hard sweat of rock, drum beat, dumb beat, always total, the excessiveness always on call to that fire. With you it seemed something would have to crack moon, sooner or later. You had your moments, dark and private, gloomy affairs, as if maturity itself was some kind of damned intrusion upon the timing of a well-planned prank. That boyish truth is gone, knocked out. And so are you, dear boy, gone like LA surf and Beach Boy sand. Yet you are the restless spirit, forever stirred. Play your drums, drummer boy. Your story is over. Your story is over, Barbara Ann.
This is BBC Radio 5 Live.
Out here in the fields. It's amazing because because you have said that you have described yourself, which no one would associate the word boring with Roger Daltrey, but you have said that about yourself, haven't you, in terms of in rock and roll context?
Well, I think to the ones doing the drugs, I probably was extremely boring because I was straight, you know, I wouldn't be. I was, for want of a saying, a phrase, I never wanted to be one of the sheep. I always wanted to be the dog. And so I was always the odd one out.
I mean, and that, of course, comes with it quite a controlling behaviour, does it? Because you want to be, you know, it's not easy to delegate. I just want to be
me. I don't want to be a sheep that's led by the nose.
Yeah.
And hurtled into series of gates that are forever closing on you. I never wanted to be that. So hello.
Hello.
That's my phone.
Go on,
wonderful?
Who's calling you? I'd love to know who's calling.
This is a really interesting phone, this one. Look,
who's calling Roger Daltrey?
I don't know.
I'd love to know.
Whoever they do, I know what they can do now. Blimey, it's Irish Jack. Go away, Irish Jack. Dear, bless you.
Oh, you can't just say the name Irish Jack without telling me who Irish Jack is.
Irish Jack is one of the old Shepherd's Bush mods from the early days. Wonderful, wonderful man. Very, very eloquent man. He was one of the people that gave Pete the idea to write Quadrophenia. And he's a very funny guy, and we've had some very good times over the years. He was a postman in Cork, but he lived in the days we knew him in Shepherd's Bush. He lived in Shepherd's Bush, just down the road from me, and what a character. He's never dull.
So he must have heard you were in town, and then perhaps wants to go out with you this evening. Do you think?
No, I think he's in town tomorrow night, and that'll be good because we'll have a drink together and share a few yarns.
Right, I look forward to seeing you in the front page of the Sun then on Friday morning after Roger Daltrey and Irish Jack go on a mad one in London.
Yeah.
So I hope that those that are listening have enjoyed those stories of mine taken from the Irish Jack memoir, which I attached a working title called A Mishmash of Irish Jack, and that's what it is. It's a mishmash of my memories with the band. And it's been a pleasure talking to Paul Bierman, and I wish everybody the very best of luck and good health and happy listening. So thank you very much, and thank you to Paul Bierman. Thank you.
And there we have it, a mishmash of Irish Jack. I hope you enjoyed those stories as much as I enjoyed hearing them for the first time. What comes across for me is Jack's natural creativity, and it was an absolute privilege to experience it up close, as it were. I consider Jack a creative catalyst, helping to inspire and make things happen. How lucky we are as Who fans that the Who met Irish Jack so early on in their career. If that hadn't happened, things like Quadrophenia might not exist. I'd like to say a big thank you to Irish Jack for not only being the first person to reply to me when I first contacted people connected to the Who, but also for his support and encouragement since then, and for helping to fuel my own creativity. And thank you, Jack, for taking a chance on me when you really didn't have to. If you'd like to help us make more episodes of Talking About the Who, then why not consider becoming a Patreon supporter at patreon.com/Talking About the Who. You could also have access to our early bonus episodes featuring Jodie Lynn Scott and Chris Charlesworth, as well as the upcoming bits of bonus content that we'll be releasing during the remainder of Season 1 and beyond. Patreon.com/Talking About the Who. Another way you could support us is by going to buymeacoffee.com/Talking About the Who and making a one-off donation. To everyone who's already supporting us, a big, big thank you. You can also follow Talking About the Who on Facebook, Instagram and Blue Sky. And that's it for this episode. I'll see you again on New Year's Day in 2 weeks' time. Until then, thank you for listening, look after yourselves, have a great Christmas, and as Roger Daltrey always says, be lucky. Goodbye.